Oklahoma is rising by rethinking, reinvesting, and reinventing with Brownfields redevelopment. Here to begin the Oklahoma Brownfields Conference is the Environmental Programs Manager for the Brownfields section of the Land Protection Division at the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality and Conference Chair. Welcome, Lloyd Kirk.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a great evening last night. The Thunder did win, so we're on our way. So it was a great game. I hope you had a great evening, and thanks for coming. We have people at this conference from 20 different states, so it really is a diverse crowd. But for the next 2 days, you have a great conference. You have a group of professionals that have come here to speak on environmental remediation, on brownfields, and a number of subjects that's in your program, and I hope you can attend all the sessions. This conference, though, would not be possible without a lot of things, and you guys know this. But we have a lot of sponsors that helped out this year. Our signature sponsor, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, I'm going to go through these. Our networking sponsor, and tonight, guys, it's over at the Petroleum Club. So if you haven't been there, it's going to be nice. It's sponsored by Devon Energy. Our exclusive sponsor today, sponsored by the Tulsa Industrial Authority, which we appreciate that. We also had a great number of platinum sponsors, including Chesapeake Energy, the Oklahoma City Brownfields Program, Crow & Dunlevy, Intercon, Lochner, and Terracon. Without these sponsors and the other sponsors, it wouldn't happen. The breakfast today was sponsored by Basin Environmental and Safety Technologies. All of our sponsors are listed in the program. They're also listed on the website. But without the sponsors, this wouldn't happen, and you guys know that. But it also wouldn't happen without our great planning committee. I am blessed, I'm telling you that, with a great planning committee and also a great staff that put this on. And if you're in the crowd, if the planning committee and the staff, if you could stand up for a second, I'd appreciate it. Any of the planning committee people could stand up. I know some of you. Stand up. My staff's out there, so it's kind of hard. But anyway, seriously, we met monthly and had just a great committee. We added something different in our planning this year, and we added some college scholarships, basically. We added 3, and it was competitive. They submitted an essay to my staff. They reviewed them, and we had 3 recipients of that, and they all came from the University of Oklahoma. Secretary Shearer. I'm from Oklahoma State. I don't know why, but they all came from OU. So maybe because my staff came from OU. I'm going to have to work on that. We're going to have to work on that. But we had 3 recipients, and if you're in the crowd right now, could you stand? There was 3 of you. If you're in the crowd, there's 1. Okay, anyone? Okay, there's 2. Okay, let's give them a hand. And like I said, it was competitive. They had a number of subjects to choose from, green remediation, things like that, and staff reviewed those, and I appreciate you coming, and I hope you learned something. Everyone's encouraged to review our website, oklahomabrownfields.com. We have our tour that's going to happen on tomorrow afternoon. All the biographies are in there. All the presentations will be online. Also, this session will be videoed in the general session, and then all the other sessions will be audio and on MP3. So if you listen when you're in the plane or driving around, you can listen to that. We believe it's important on our green initiatives, and we had the Skirvin and our event planner and staff get together in a committee on a number of green initiatives that we instituted, and there were over 30 green initiatives in the planning. And just as far as an event planner, they did a great job on these green initiatives, which we should be doing since we're this environmental program. One of the things that we do that I really like, that our event planner does, is all the unused food is donated to the Jesus House, okay? And that just doesn't happen. We have to go through some documentation to do that, but it happened. This year we were having some problems, but he made it happen because it really means a lot to our planning committee that food is donated. To be honest with you, I think we started a trend. We started doing that in 2008, and I remember meeting with Mayor Kirk Humphreys that year, and he goes, "I've been to 1,000 conferences, and we never have done that." And so there's no reason why we shouldn't, but I appreciate our planning committee recognizing that. I'm honored today, though, to introduce and recognize our Executive Director of the Department of Environmental Quality in Oklahoma. He currently serves on the National Environmental Finance Advisory Board. In 2009, the Oklahoma chapter of the American Society for Public Administration awarded him the Distinguished Public Service Award, recognizing his high standards of excellence in public service and his dedication to Oklahoma. And it's my honor to introduce Steve Thompson.
Well, good morning. It's good to have you all here. I have to tell you that those of you who know me know that I'm a pretty crusty old regulator. But every time I see that Oklahoma Rising video, I get goosebumps every time. It is an extraordinary piece. Lloyd, by the way, I happen to know why all of the recipients of the scholarships were from OU, just so you know. And finally, go Thunder. Yeah. I happened to hear on the radio this morning that Sunday's game starts at 8:30 in the evening again. So I'm predicting the Thunder in 4 because, quite frankly, I need the rest. Well, welcome to our Brownfields Conference. We are proud to provide you with this opportunity, and we hope that you find the sessions here informative and useful. As I mentioned, DEQ is at its core a regulatory agency. However, our Brownfields program's mission is to assist in returning derelict properties to productive use. Now, I'm an old farm boy, and my dad always told me, son, take care of the land. They're not making any more of it. And so this particular program has a very warm place in my heart because what we do is return property that has either zero or negative value into something productive again. Our cleanup program provides a means to resolve environmental liability, and through our partnership with EPA, we have capital to fund cleanup projects through loans and subgrants. This hotel, the Skirvin, is an excellent example of how DEQ can assist with redevelopment projects. This hotel was renovated and rejuvenated after DEQ provided a $700,000 loan for the abatement of the asbestos in the building. DEQ is very conscious of how environmental issues are entwined with economic development. We are committed to ensuring that our actions protect human health and the environment, are fair to the regulated community, and promote sustainable processes. We are also committed to meeting our mission without impeding economic growth. We want to ensure that we pass on a clean and prosperous state to future generations. So again, welcome to our conference. If you're from out of state, welcome to our state and enjoy your time in Oklahoma City and watch Oklahoma rise. Thank you very much. Now, it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, my old friend. We're both old friends. Sam Coleman is the acting regional administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Region 6. Previous to that, he served as the director of the Superfund Division in Dallas. He has had a distinguished career at EPA. In particular, in August of 2005, he served as EPA's senior federal official in New Orleans to guide the response to Hurricane Katrina. And if you visited New Orleans during that time period, you know what a monumental task that was. That Category 4 storm brought severe damage and destruction to thousands of residential and commercial properties. The devastation left entire communities of homes sitting in contaminated floodwaters up to 25 feet deep. He put together the EPA team tasked with fulfilling the emergency response and recovery missions assigned to EPA by the state and by FEMA. For these efforts, he was awarded a meritorious Presidential Rank Award in 2009. Please join me in welcoming Sam Coleman, the Acting Regional Administrator of Region 6.
Good morning. I want to first of all thank Steve for that introduction. Steve mentioned we're old friends. He didn't really want to emphasize the word old. We're just old friends. You know, I think that it's particularly fitting for me to be here today to help kick off this Brownfields conference. Brownfields is a very special program. But more than that, I think it's very important that I, in turn, recognize Steve Thompson, who is a great advocate and a great person to lead up the environmental program here in Oklahoma. And Steve, working along with Gary Scherer, the Secretary of Environment, I think that they really present an excellent team to lead this entire state's environmental program and to really make sure that the people of Oklahoma are protected. Gary and Steve are strong and formidable advocates for the environment. They really work tirelessly with the EPA, with the industry, and with a variety of other organizations around the country to provide excellent leadership. And I want to personally thank both of them for all of the work that they do in making this one of the best state programs in the nation. So I want to really recognize that. Again, thank you for your invitation. I want to share a few thoughts about Brownfields, really from a partly regional but also national perspective. This program, as I mentioned, was extremely important to me because as I have come along in my own environmental career, I've seen the impact of past contamination on communities. It can be extremely devastating to communities and to cities. And to really come to Oklahoma City and to Oklahoma in general, it's important to really recognize a lot of the accomplishments that the state has made. It's been 10 years since the Brownfields law was passed, and the program really, it is here to promote area-wide planning, and this planning really increases the value of property across the areas where brownfields are implemented, sometimes as much as 2 to 3%. That's an important fact because most people think of contaminated property as detracting from the value of property, but when you see the Brownfields program come in, you really see an increase in property value. The program has also created over 75,000 jobs nationwide, and as Steve mentioned, that's an important fact in the ongoing sustainability and economic viability of every community. Brownfields funding also has allowed more than 10,000 people to be trained in green jobs, and over 70% of those have been placed in permanent positions. So Brownfields is not only helping clean up, but we're also investing in the future. Brownfields, Oklahoma is particularly important to Administrator Lisa Jackson. There's no better program to show how we can protect the environment and boost the economy at the same time. These two concepts are not mutually exclusive, but in fact, they really support each other. And you don't have to go very far. Steve mentioned the Skirvin Hotel. You can walk right outside this door and you really see how brownfields really can boost the economy of an area and really help with the viability of a downtown area and of a city in general. Now, within the program, we've conducted some pilot studies to really get a better understanding how the economic impact and how it really promotes environment. One of those outcomes is we found that where brownfields actually redevelops property in the highly populated areas, it actually helps decrease the vehicle miles driven between 32 and 57%. Now, this is important because, as we know, one of the issues with air quality really centers around vehicle miles, and where you can really build back in and do that infilling as opposed to building on greenfields, you can see that it can reduce vehicle miles along with maintaining a lot of green space. And that helps with our air pollution issues, and which also is something that the program has a great impact on. Brownfields are a perfect catalyst to boost the economy while reclaiming previously unusable land. As I mentioned, downtown Oklahoma City is one of those great examples. This hotel was empty for about 15 years until the grant that Steve mentioned really allowed the hotel to be restored and renovated into the beautiful property that it is today, and we're very happy to be here. Another example is the Devon Energy Center, which, as you can see, it totally transforms the Oklahoma skyline. I can remember when they started that building years ago, as we had worked with the state, and the state had really helped provide a grant to clean up some of the previous contamination or the property that was there, the uses that was there. I actually didn't know how tall it was going to be. And every time I visit Oklahoma City, it seems like it was getting bigger and bigger. And I kept wondering now, how tall is that building actually going to be? But it is by far the tallest building, completely transforming the skyline of Oklahoma City, and it's going to be a tremendous monument for years to come. You know, the building is LEED certified, and it also is going to house one of the largest companies in Oklahoma. Native American stories of Oklahoma will be showcased in the American Indian Cultural Center, which is another one of our Brownfields projects. This center will share Native American cultures with visitors and create a very unique experience. We've also had grants outside of Oklahoma City. I don't want to leave the other areas of the state out, just in case anybody from other parts of the state are here. We've worked very closely with the city of Tulsa and with Ada, Oklahoma, to provide grants. We've also worked with a number of the tribes to continue to provide grants and opportunities for redevelopment in their areas. A particular note is Cherokee Nation and the absentee Shawnee tribe. All of these successes show how brownfields can be developed into major redevelopments, and it does create jobs, from construction jobs to help with the cleanup and the construction of new and more usable buildings, to the jobs that the employees that work in those new buildings will have after the site is finished. Now, I want to make sure that everybody here also recognizes that your work in your individual activities also deserve a lot of credit. Whether you work for a city government or a county, tribal government, we have a lot of law firms represented, we have engineering firms, we have a variety of folks that all come together to really help build this program into the great success that it is in this state. Your action is working with us in making sure that we can take the funds that are provided by the Brownfields grants to really put those dollars to the most productive use and make them very effective in creating these redevelopment opportunities as well as creating jobs and the ongoing economic redevelopment. Finally, I want to say that this program can truly reignite a city and reignite a community where sometimes it seems as though it can't be done. So the tremendous success of the program over time, you know, sometimes I like to say this is not the end, it's just the beginning. There are always more and better opportunities out there, so I encourage everyone to continue to be engaged and continue to look for those opportunities so that we can continue to build on the success of the program. So again, thanks for inviting me, and I've enjoyed my opportunity to be in here. I've gotten a good steak, enjoyed some good company with the folks here, left a few dollars in the state. I know that's always good. That's the purpose of sometimes having visitors here. I hope everybody else is doing the same. I look forward to continuing the work of this program and others across the state. So now I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker, who is sponsored today by Intercon Services, Inc. Our speaker is a senior resident fellow in Urban Land Institute, Canizaro Klingbeil Family Chair for Urban Development. He joins 3 other resident fellows who specialize in housing, real estate, and finance. He also specializes in environmental issues. His extensive experience in urban revitalization is a key addition to the senior resident fellows area of expertise. Since January 2006, he serves as ULI's Gulf Coast liaison, helping to coordinate the leadership of New Orleans and the public to advance the implementation of rebuilding recommendations made by ULI's Advisory Services Panel. He also worked with Louisiana State leadership, as well as the leadership in hurricane-impacted areas in Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, to identify areas appropriate for ULI involvement. Prior to his ULI experience, he served 3 terms as mayor of Pittsburgh, where he initiated public-private partnership strategy and leveraged more than $4.5 billion in economic development. He led efforts to secure and oversee $1 billion in funding for development of 2 professional sports facilities and a new convention center that is the largest LEED Gold certified building in the United States. He developed strategic partnerships to transform more than 1,000 acres of blighted, abandoned industrial property into new commercial, residential, and retail public uses, and oversaw the development of more than 25 miles of riverfront and urban green space. Now, I'm just also going to add that he also understands football. Just in case there are any football fans out there, you should know I'm one. So he is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. You know, being a Steelers fan myself, you know, I felt like we immediately had a great long-term relationship since hopefully one of these days we'll meet each other at a Steelers game. But here to share a message about building on innovation, please welcome the Honorable Tom Murphy.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. You know, right down the hall is a group of people from Mobile, Alabama. Did you all happen to notice that? It's the Chamber Exchange. And you know why they're here? They're here because they want to know how Oklahoma City did what they've done over the last 20 years to change the sense of who this city is. And so it's a pretty remarkable story that cities will come here to learn from you now about how you've converted buildings like this and the Brickyard and things to create great, vibrant places. No, I was in Moscow, in Russia, right before Christmas, and I was invited there to talk about Brownfields by the Moscow government, and we had a dinner that Sunday night, and we were introducing ourselves, and I stood up and said I was from Pittsburgh, and the mayor of Moscow said, my favorite city in the United States, because I'm a big Pittsburgh Penguin fan. You know, he didn't know, Moscow's 12 million people, right? He didn't know that Pittsburgh was 330,000 people. So when the Thunder wins the championship, know that everybody in the world will think of Oklahoma City in a very different way than maybe you even think about yourselves. Sports and music are really powerful voices that talk about your city in a way that is universal in many ways. So I was the mayor of Pittsburgh. You know, how would you like to be the mayor of a city that was once known as hell with the lid off? That was Pittsburgh. So we're all here because we love Brownfields, and Pittsburgh was really a brownfield. Pretty much the whole city at one time, certainly for me growing up. When we grew up, we always said we didn't know the sky was blue, or we didn't know that there were stars at night, because it was always so polluted. And it changed, and we had to change. And part of what I want to talk about is that change that every city in America is facing right now, and talk a little bit about how some cities have faced that challenge, and particularly Pittsburgh. And I want to use a story. How many of you have ever heard of Horatio Nelson Jackson? Anybody know who he is? Well, he changed your lives, particularly here in Oklahoma City. He changed your lives. And I want to tell you the story because it's really a metaphor for what we're going through right now. Horatio Nelson Jackson was a doctor from Vermont, and he was in California at a medical convention at the dinner with a group of other doctors, and they were debating what the impact of the automobile would be on American society. And all the other doctors thought it was really a toy for the rich. There was absolutely no infrastructure to support it. No gas stations, no mechanics. And Horatio bet them all $50 that night he could drive across the United States in 90 days. And the very next day, he went out and bought his first car, went and he convinced the young mechanic, Sewall Crocker, to go with him. And for whatever reasons that day, they bought a dog named Bud. And the very next day, they're on the road driving across the United States with no support, no maps, and no great plan about how to do it. And it was 1903. And in 1903, there were 150 miles of paved roads in the United States, 8,000 cars, and no highway department in any state. 63 days later, Horatio, Sewall, and Bud drove down Fifth Avenue in New York City. They were the first people to drive across the United States. By 1923, there were 10 million cars, hundreds of thousands of miles of paved road, and a highway department in every state. Society, as we knew it, changed completely in those 20 years. We're sitting right now where Horatio Nelson Jackson was sitting. We're looking at a world that is getting redefined just as we look out. Globalization, technology, and demographics are fundamentally changing the nature of our society. When you go, I was in China last week, when you travel and you watch what is going on in the world and how things are moving around and how people are communicating and the demographic change of how, in Oklahoma City is no different. You're going to be adding several 100,000 people over the next 10 years in the Oklahoma City area, and how where they live and how you develop has a lot to do, and the infrastructure you put in has a lot to do with the quality of your life and how you invest. And the trendsetters within that are people that sort of look like me, baby boomers, that are trying to stay active and looking for different ways to kind of live. But even more powerful are the Gen Yers, the largest generation in American history. People between the age of 18 and 32, 83 million of them. And they're looking at a very different kind of lifestyle than many of us did. I was at a class at the University of Pittsburgh speaking a couple weeks ago, and I said, we had an Ozzie and Harriet model of sort of development in America for 50 years. Nobody in the room knew who Ozzie and Harriet was. You want to talk about feeling old? Do you all know who Ozzie and Harriet are? and now, the Gen Yers, they're 6 times less likely to have a driver's license than we are. That's a General Motors survey. General Motors is trying to figure out how to instill the love of the automobile in them. They text on average 1,700 times a month. Do you? I'm raising that because we're talking about 75% of that generation in surveys done by ULI and others want to live in walkable urban neighborhoods. 75% want to live in walkable urban neighborhoods. Think about the impact that has. And the other big change we're seeing is, I'm not going to ask you to memorize this. This is some cities around the country, is where we're working. Over the last 20 years, Oklahoma City's lost 35% of its manufacturing jobs. In the same period of time, the jobs in professional and business services and in education and health services, technical jobs, have increased by almost 90%. You have twice as many people working in technical related jobs now than you do in manufacturing. Think about what that means and how you invest in infrastructure. Manufacturing needs roads and industrial parks out in the countryside. The technical jobs driven by your hospitals and universities in many ways need very different kind of infrastructure. You need to build the intellectual talent of the community. But you're becoming a different kind of city. And how you build on that, whether you build in an old city or a new city, really will determine whether you're a successful 21st century city. And there are some ingredients that come out of a 21st century city, I believe, that will define those cities as successful. You are a remarkable example of a city, which I'll talk about a little bit, making the right kind of choices, about being well managed, about being vibrant, a place where people want to, those Gen Yers, where they want to, and the baby boomers, where they want to be, and to enjoy themselves, about having an educated society, building on the raw materials you have, understanding what they are, whether it's energy or it's aeronautical opportunities that you have to build on. It's about being entrepreneurial. I mean, you see new companies starting here around energy that have been remarkable stories of success. That's about an entrepreneurial culture that supports that kind of a success. You need the capital to grow that, and how you create the public-private partnerships that build on that. One of the real challenges in America is that we have so many governments. We have so much democracy. We have 74,000 local governments, 13,500 school districts. Think about that. We're competing in a global economy now with China and the UK and Germany that have centralized school districts, centralized land use most of the time. Our ability to compete depends on literally hundreds of thousands of local volunteers on school boards and city council people and mayors in cities that are going to make the right decisions, not only to just keep the city where it is, but to invest in the future. I use this as an example of well-managed. This is the homicide rate in New York City. As you can see, in the 90s, it hit almost 2,300 people in 1 year were murdered. Can you imagine? And New York elected a new mayor, and Rudy Giuliani, and appointed Police Commissioner Bill Bratton, and they made a decision to change the behavior in New York City. It wasn't that all the bad guys moved to New Jersey. It was that they made a decision to manage and to use technology in a different way than any city had ever done in America in terms of managing crime. And they fundamentally changed the dynamic of New York City. So today it continues to be the safest city per capita in America. And that's about well-managed. That's about cities understanding that nothing works if it's not clean and safe. Cities aren't going to work. People won't want to be there. And so New York did that, and every city will need to do that to be competitive. The second is the cities need to be places where people want to be. This is Millennium Park in Chicago, and it was an old railroad. This was a brownfield site. It was an old railroad yard, and Mayor Daley, when the railroad was going to get rid of it, said, let's buy it and just put a parking garage there. And the civic leaders of Chicago said, if we're going to it's right up against Grand Park. She said, they said, let's build something world class. And so they built Millennium Park, now the single biggest visited area in Chicago, $2.2 billion worth of new development. You'll see the condos if you go there around it. It created huge value, and it's created, I mean, there are thousands of people on a nice summer day that go there to get spit on. If you've seen that, because that picture there spits water out, as you can see. Can you imagine? Can you imagine investing in a park that creates that kind of value? That's what cities. The other I mentioned is education. If twice as many of you are now working in technical jobs and in professional jobs than in manufacturing, what do you think the single most important ingredient is in that regard? Education. The single most important ingredient is you have an educated workforce. If you're going to compete in the 21st century, you need an educated workforce. You're doing okay. You've really increased dramatically your high school graduation level. You're doing okay in bachelor's and graduate. You need to do better if you're going to continue to compete. But that focus on education becomes a very important part. And let me give you an example. Singapore and Jamaica each became independent countries in 1960. Jamaica made a decision that it was going to invest its resources into the exploitation of natural resources, bauxite and others. It was going to develop those industries. Singapore, on the other hand, a small, impoverished country, new country in 1960, made a decision that it was going to invest in education. It was going to have the most literate population of any city in the world. That was the goal in 1960. They've succeeded. And you can see the difference in value creation. The average salary and the average income in Singapore is $43,000 per person compared to Jamaica at $8,000. That is a real measure of investing in education. When I talk about entrepreneurial, I want to talk about intentionality, because what I found in Pittsburgh, over many years of working in Pittsburgh, was as our industry collapsed, we had to redefine ourselves. And after I left as mayor and have worked and traveled with ULI, I've come to realize that every city in America and in the world actually is trying to redefine itself for this new economy. And probably the earliest one that was successful was the Research Triangle. This is Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. Back in the late 1950s, early 1960s, literally true story, 6 guys get rained out of a golf game, and they're in the country club lamenting the fact that they send their sons and daughters to college to get educated, and then they don't want to come back there because there was just tobacco and lumber to do, and there was not a lot of... It was not an exciting place, and it wasn't a place that their kids wanted to live in. And so they went out, those 6 guys went out and bought 7,000 acres of old tobacco lands in between Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, and they called it the Research Triangle. And over the years, they worked very hard to attract research. They partnered with their universities, 3 world-class universities around this, with the government. And you might know now that the Research Triangle is the most successful and largest research park in the country, 40,000 jobs, the highest per capita income in education of any place in America. It is a remarkable success story. The same thing has happened in San Diego, which was in the 1980s a sleepy naval town. It is now the 6th most powerful technology community, in large part because of the leadership of the mayor of San Diego back then, and the corporate leadership worked very hard to get a university located there, a strong engineering department, and literally thousands of companies have spun out of that, the research done there. The most remarkable run right now is in Central Florida. Jeb Bush, when he was governor of Florida in 2004, made a decision to invest over $800 million to seed a technology economy in Florida. Now, think about that in 2004. Florida's booming. But Jeb Bush saw that real estate, agricultural, and and tourism were really shaky foundations on which to build an economy. And he wanted to diversify that economy. And he committed $800 million of state money to invest in technology, to seed technology economies. And he used $310 million of that to attract the Stanford Burnham Research Institute that is located in California to attract a division into central Florida, into a cow pasture. And 7,000 acres owned by a developer who donated 650 acres to create what is called Medical City now, east of Orlando Airport. In 2006, the first building started. Today, there are over 10,000 jobs there in research and medical care. It has really created a whole new economy in Central Florida. You think of Disney World as the economy, but this is the second largest employment sector now is in technology jobs. And what we are watching all across the country are citizens understanding that they need to invest in the future. There's no better example than Oklahoma City here. Of all the ballot measures put on the ballot over the last 10 years, 77% of them have passed. Oklahoma City with the MAPS program is an example that citizens are recognizing that just cutting taxes don't necessarily cause the city to be ready for the future, so people invest in the future. And it is pretty remarkable to see, whether it's a blue state or a red state, citizens making choices to invest in their future. Pittsburgh is an example of that. As I mentioned, we were known at one time as hell with the lid off. We didn't have blue skies like this. We had to clear up this picture here, right? We do have blue skies now. We were a city that was as environmentally degraded as any city in America. And now we've been ranked by The Economist magazine and Forbes magazine and others as the most livable city in America. So how does a city go from being the most environmentally degraded over 30 years to becoming one of the cleanest by a great partnership and a vision shared by the public sector, the private sector, and the universities? And so we worked very hard to transform Pittsburgh, and we learned some lessons. And as I've traveled around, I've realized that many other cities are facing the same challenge. If you've not been to Pittsburgh, this is our center of our city where three rivers come together, the Allegheny, the Mon River, and form the Ohio River there. And the big blue areas above are new stadiums, which I'll talk about in a minute. The blue area on the down part of the river is the new convention center, which is a large certified green building. And the red buildings are a commercial and retail district. And I just want to focus on one area there. I want to mention the power of arts and culture. The foundation became part of, you can see that little squared rectangle blocked area there. That was Pittsburgh's red light district. There were 22 massage parlors and porno theaters in that little area there, sort of a 3-block by 7-block area 20 years ago. If you go there today, there are 1,500 legitimate performances going on a year. I underline legitimate performances. It's opera and symphony and ballet and a whole host of other things that are happening there, led by the corporate community and foundations. They bought old vaudeville theaters and restored them and created a place where almost 2 million people a year go now. For all the cultural performances. We built a high school and middle school performing arts high school there. Our son went there, and he'd come home every couple of weeks and say, "Dad, I need $20." We got the tickets from the symphony, the ballet, the theater. If they didn't sell out, they'd send them over to the high school, and we got tickets for $5, and we want to stay for dinner and go to the symphony or go to the ballet. What an experience for teenagers to be able to enjoy a city in that way. And it's created a huge vibrancy. At the same time, we've watched corporations make choices to build on brownfield sites. This was an old railroad yard that PNC Bank invested invested in to build an operations center in the city, and we partnered with them to do that. And we had an old football stadium, and the Steelers lost the Super Bowl, and we had to get rid of it. I put this here because I want to know any architects in the room? What were you all smoking and drinking in the 60s and 70s? I felt like when I was mayor, I mean, look at this. Here you have a great riverfront site, and what do they put there? The highest and best use on the riverfront, a road and surface parking. So we blew it up. That was a 1970s building. And we instead and built a new football stadium. Sam, I invite you up to it, and a new baseball park, and a new convention center, and that's where that surface parking lot was. We created a place that people love to hang out down on the riverfront, and love to go play. And the water, you've done it here in Oklahoma City. You've created a great place for people to want to go. You create places where people want to go, and pretty soon they love your city. And young people particularly want to be part of that city. We had a lot of brownfield site. The first year I became mayor, I directed our redevelopment authority to purchase over 1,500 acres because nobody was going to touch this. We're a city that was dying. We had steel mills like this, and up and down the rivers that had been vacant for 20 years, and the private sector was not going to tackle this site and others like it. This is a 129-acre steel mill site. This was a personal one for me. My father worked in the steel mill for 51 years, and while 10,000 men and women made steel, there's now a cheesecake factory. My father would shoot me if he were alive. We tore it down, and we put in, there's almost $600 million worth of development now on that steel mill site of a mixed-use development of housing and retail and commercial developments. And you can see it's a public-private investment that we did in that we built a whole new neighborhood on that steel mill site, and created real value for the city. And this mill particularly was sort of our image of the decline of Pittsburgh. As we lost. And let me just describe that to you. Between 1970 and 1990, we lost 500,000 people left the Pittsburgh region. That's why there's some Steeler fans in Oklahoma City, okay? And even in Dallas, right, Sam? Because people were moving. They didn't see a future for themselves in Pittsburgh as the steel mills were shutting down. And so we were facing a real challenge to change that trend. Another one, this was one of the bigger sites we bought. This was a slag dump. You all know what slag is? Slag's a byproduct of steel. After they cook everything to make the iron and the steel, it's a cinder. And they dumped it here for 90 years. It was 300 feet deep. It was 250 acres. We bought that untested because we figured we needed to get on with our lives. The steel industries were pretty good citizens. They didn't dump a lot of bad stuff in it. So we bought that, and we worked with private developers, and of the 250 acres, 150 acres is now in a new park that runs down through that gorge to the river, and we built 700 houses. 400 and some are built. It has been the most successful development in the whole region in terms of appreciation and value and in demand for the housing. It has been, as you can see, a public-private investment. We took a lot of risk on this with the private sector. Nobody knew if anybody would live on a slag dump. We had to bring 3 feet of topsoil in to get anything to grow on it. As you could see, it looked like the moon there. And yet, we have created real value on these brownfield sites. The universities have been important partners for us in shaping our economy as the steel industry went away. A question of where people would work in Pittsburgh, and we have watched incredible growth of technology-oriented companies. We partnered with Carnegie Mellon University in building this innovation center on their campus. This was a facility not for startups, but for existing companies who are doing joint research at Carnegie Mellon University. And one of those was Google, that located a couple jobs here. And Google liked Pittsburgh, and they were growing. At the same time, we were investing in a failed urban 1970s failed urban renewal area in Pittsburgh, and got a Home Depot to locate there to create some vibrancy in a retail. And this is in the mid-90s, in the middle of a area which 5 miles from the nearest interstate. It wasn't a place where Home Depot normally went. We convinced them to go. It was on an old brownfield site that had been contaminated, gas stations and such. We were able to get them to locate there. We provided some financing. But right down the street from this Home Depot was a big old warehouse, and we worked with Whole Foods. Whole Foods had never been in Pittsburgh before. Convinced them to locate a store there. They did. And then right down the street from this was a big old Nabisco bakery building. Had been vacant for about 15 years, 8 stories. And Google said, you know, we liked what's going on in that neighborhood, and we're going to locate 1,000 jobs in Pittsburgh, and we'd like to locate in that old Nabisco bakery building. The developer who had bought it thought he had hit a home run. And that was a brownfield site also that we rehabbed. And so Google now has 1,000 jobs there because of the university, and they're in that neighborhood because Home Depot was willing to put a store in an urban neighborhood 5 miles away from the nearest interstate. The other thing, when I was growing up in Pittsburgh, our mothers would always tell us 2 things: be home before the streetlights come on, and never go near the rivers. And my mother would always say, if you go in those rivers, you're going to melt because they were so polluted. And and now we break both of those rules. We go out after the streetlights come on. But more importantly, we go on the rivers. You can now ride a bike completely off-road from the Pittsburgh, right at the point there, all the way to Washington, D.C. on a continuous riverfront trail. That's pretty spectacular. It's 335 miles. And within the city, we've built about 30 miles of riverfront trail that up and down the rivers where you could never have gone. And so we use our rivers in a very different kind of way. And we even had places where people were parking on the waterfronts. And as you can see, we got rid of the parking and converted even those areas where highways were built into some park area. Oklahoma City has done some of the same kind of decisions. It's been, for me, remarkable to watch over the last 10 or so years the progress of Oklahoma City in the MAPS program. And ULI, in fact, in our magazine that we just put out, the infrastructure magazine for this year, highlights Oklahoma City in the civic leadership that this MAPS program demonstrates, of the willingness to people to raise taxes on themselves, to invest in the city's future, their ability to be competitive. Oklahoma City is creating a buzz about itself because of these kinds of investments. And for those of you from Oklahoma City, I want to compliment you. And these are just generally some of the lessons I've learned, whatever city, whether it's Beijing or Pittsburgh or Oklahoma City. When I go to, there are ingredients. One is it's always about leadership. It's about people basically saying that we can do this when others don't see the value. And that's particularly true with brownfield sites. When my experience, when we bought that slag dump, and we proposed, we were going to go to have a public meeting, and we proposed taking that slag dump that looked like the moon and converting it to 700 new homes and 150 acres of the 250 acres into a new park. I'm thinking this is like a home run. People are going to love me. I'm in my second year of being mayor, and we go to the public meeting, 200 people show up, and everybody wanted to keep the slag dump. You all been there, haven't you? You know how hard it is to change, that people always want, they're resistant to change. And so leadership, to move forward in a world that's changing as rapidly as our world is, leadership is so important. And the second is the vision of where you want to go, how you want to get there. The third is what Lloyd and others on her staff represent, is having the institutional capacity to get things done, how you get things done and how it happens in a professional way. it's sort of easy to talk about something. It's difficult to go and get it done. So we're in an example in this hotel of people that came together and figured out how to get something done. This sat vacant. I'm sure there was controversy about putting the public money in, and yet look at what is done for Oklahoma City. How you pay for it? There's never enough money, but you know, there's 12 different sources of financing that went into making this building happen. People figured it out. I mentioned education. That's the raw material of today. Without an educated workforce, communities aren't going to succeed. And finally, in beating up my friend here who's the architect, you think about when you're building something. I say sometimes there's a disease in the water. And the disease is the it'll do disease. Is that cities say, well, we want to build a boathouse, or we want to build a new highway, or we want to build a new building, and you know, there's a lot of controversy about where it is and how big it is, and then there's always a question about how we're going to pay for it, and people will say, well, you know, that's the best we can do. Do you want to be an it'll do city? You know, Oklahoma City has not been. Oklahoma City, when I look at your boathouses you've built, I look at the new highway that's being built as you come in from the airport that we drove on yesterday, and the quality of the interchanges and the bridges that go over that highway. Look at that and think about what an interstate normally looks like and what that looks like. Somebody is paying attention to design. And they're saying, as I drive in from the airport, I've been here before, I didn't see that new highway. As I drive in from the airport, I immediately think world class rather than it'll do. As I look at the new Devon office tower, as I drive by your boathouses, that says, without anybody saying it, world class. So we are at a moment in time. We're sitting where Horatio was sitting, looking out at a future that is getting redefined before our eyes. And the challenge for every community is to make a choice. This is about intentionality. This is about whether you're going to be an it'll-do community moving into the future, comfortable in where you are, resistant to change, or whether you're going to be world-class, whether you're going to intentionally make choices that position your city and your community to compete. Oklahoma City is making those choices, the right choices. That's why an exchange from the Chamber of Commerce's Mobile is right down the street. That's why Matt, our technical expert here who made all this work for us back there, who I was talking to earlier, said, you know, had you ever been in Oklahoma City in 1990, I probably wouldn't have stayed here. But it's a great city now. He's one of those Gen Yers, I think. It's about that. It's a remarkable story you're writing here. And I know all of you are not from Oklahoma City, so I hope you go back and recognize that we're at this moment in time where Horatio sat, when the world's changing. The cities that make the right choices, that decide to reach rather than to go to the lowest common denominators, will be the cities that succeed in the 21st century. Thank you.
Is that on? Okay. Thank you, Mayor Murphy, for that speech on building on innovation. Let's give him another hand. To get Mayor Murphy here from Pittsburgh was a tough chore. He came from China. He literally came from China, from Beijing. And we were talking yesterday when we were driving out of Oklahoma City taking a tour. He goes, Lloyd, what's the population of Oklahoma City? I said, I had looked, 500,000, and Beijing, 30 million. 30 million in Beijing. And there's, I think, 7 or 8 of those cities that size in China alone. But, the mayor who led Pittsburgh to that transformation, is sought by all these other communities to help those communities grow. And through Brownfields issues and through infrastructure. But so we were blessed to have him here. He's literally getting on a cab, going back, and has the speaking engagement again tonight at 8 o'clock in Pittsburgh. So we were very fortunate to get him here. And the ULI Institute here in Oklahoma City helped me get him here, so I appreciate that. We're going to take a break now, and McAfee and Taft has sponsored this break, but there's one thing I forgot to mention this morning for the exhibitors. When you go through the exhibitors, there's an exhibitor card that you get from the registration desk. Go by the exhibitors, they mark on it. If you get all that marked off, and then at the end of our conference, we're going to have some drawings, but you have to go through and visit all the exhibitors. But there's an exhibitor card at the registration desk, and they'll explain how to do that. But let's have a good break, and we'll see you after a few minutes.